across East Germany. On the 7th, the government resigned. On the 8th, the Politburo went too. The moderate Hans Modrow was proposed as Prime Minister. On November the 9th, the new government opened East Germany's border and the people stormed the wall. By November the 10th, thousands had come to the west. New crossing points were created. The wall was finally breached.
Wahnsinn! Wahnsinn!
Among those helping me tell this extraordinary story from Berlin are News at 1's John Suchet, from the News at 5:40 and News at 10, Trevor MacDonald, and from ITN's Channel 4 News, Jon Snow. This Sunday morning in Berlin has been like no other. As always, people from the east and west came to the crossing points, but this time they were free to go over and to come back again. They went to church, as many of them often do, but this time they could go to the same service. They went to the parks for a walk, this time together. The wall is still there, but it's been breached. Trevor MacDonald reports now on just what that means for the people of East and West Berlin.
When the pace of change has gathered momentum here, it's done so with bewildering speed and passion. It's 4 o'clock, long before daybreak on a bitterly cold Berlin morning. But already East German border guards are dismantling part of the wall at Potsdamer Platz, site of Hitler's bunker. Watching from West Berlin as they've done for several hours, the crowd shout ecstatically, "We're coming." But it was from the east that they came 4 hours later, streaming first into no man's land, still in East German control. In the middle of this populist surge, yet another moment of history. The mayor of East Berlin, Herr Krack, sets off to meet his opposite number in the west. A simple affair, but in these momentous times, a meeting of profound significance. Touchingly, before they finally left the east, the crowds were given a lecture by a border guard on the new discipline required in these heady times.
Eine neue Disziplin!
The advice was taken in good spirit, and the moment of actual crossing into the west had come. Some were taking with them souvenirs of the part of the wall which came down today. By 10 this morning, West Berliners gathered at the church which was bombed during World War II and which has itself become a memorial and a symbol of this city's hope. West Berlin's mayor, fresh from his meeting with his East Berlin counterpart, was there. In the grounds of the church, Berlin's newest visitors were being given coffee and cakes. Once in the 17th century, Berlin actively encouraged immigration. Times have changed, but the warmth of the people here has remained. Again, today, Sunday, banks remained open for the sole purpose of giving East Berliners the 100 marks or £30 they're all entitled to. For 3 days, this city has become crisscrossed by queues for banks. This morning in Berlin, coming as it does after the remarkable events of the last week, has given this resilient city, people and politicians a chance to reflect on the future. They see what has happened here as an unmistakable sign that the Eastern Bloc dictatorships across their borders are in retreat. The very foundations of post-war Europe have been shaken. Berliners want to know what the new political vision will be. For the people crossing Checkpoint Charlie this morning, there were perhaps no thoughts of political future. But they must have reflected how after only 2 days, this crossing is becoming routine. Before lunch today, the Berlin Philharmonic, one of the world's great orchestras, and conducted by Daniel Barenboim, gave a special concert to celebrate the crossing of the people from East Germany. For them, there were free tickets, and music which more so than any political rhetoric speaks eloquently of German aspirations.
Here at the Brandenburg Gate, we've seen the focus of the celebrations over the last 3 days, and there have been some truly extraordinary moments when the youngsters first dared to scale the wall, when the East German border guards came across and pushed them off again, and when the people began the process of chipping away at the wall which has divided their city for 28 years. Well, the party's still going on, and David Chater is down there amongst the people. David, what's the atmosphere like with you?
Well, all morning the people have been streaming past the wall. They've come to stare and take part in this moment of history. They've been drinking champagne, throwing flowers at the guards. I've got part of that crowd with me now. Could you tell me, Erica, exactly what this has been like for you?
Oh, I think it's the most wonderful day of my life because I was 9 years old when they built this wall, and I couldn't believe that they would, I don't know the word. Demolished it, yes. And so it's wonderful. Everyone is coming here looking through the wall, and they're standing there taking flowers, and we can speak with them, and I couldn't believe that it's true, really.
Thanks very much. Angelica, you've come here too to take part in this. Exactly what's your reaction to it all?
Well, it's very touching to me, and it's just fantastic. I mean, it's just the most amazing thing which happened to Germany in the last 40 years, actually. So, I mean, it's just wonderful that we don't need this wall anymore, and it's over now.
I also have with me Stephanie. Stephanie, you've been here about 6 months. What do you make of it all?
Yes, it's great. It's unbelievable for me, you know. I watch television 2 days long, and it's great.
Okay, thanks. Tono, what about you?
You know, you must imagine I was just sitting for 2 days in front of radio and television, and then I saw that it's such a great moment for all Germans and all for the whole world. But I think you just have to go there and take part in, and the most amazing thing...
Okay, thanks. Right, that's all we've got time for. Thanks very much indeed, and now back to Alistair.
Thank you, David. For many in the East, the West must have appeared like an Aladdin's cave of goodies. Shops full to bursting, political freedoms taken for granted, the liberty to say what you want and go where you want. Well, that's what the people in the East had heard about, but now they've had the chance to find out what it's really like for themselves. John Suchet has been with a family from the East who were amazed at the pace with which the city opened up and became free. He's been with them, finding out what the West is like.
Their train from Rostock had left at 3 in the morning, more than 1,000 people crammed onto it. For 5.5 hours, Simone Krauleides sat on the toilet seat, her daughter Nancy on her lap, her husband Roberto at her feet. Now they were in East Berlin to join thousands more, waiting patiently at the border to cross for a day into the West. Queuing is a daily fact of life for East Europeans, whether for meat, fruit or bread. So they're used to it.
What strikes you first about these people is how relaxed they are. There's no sense of excitement, there's no sense of rush, because these people are not leaving home. They'll be back here in East Berlin tonight. They're having a day out. They want a taste of a life that they've read about in the newspapers and that they've seen on television, but that they've never experienced for themselves.
Through Checkpoint Charlie, and the Krauleides step onto Western soil for the first time in their lives. Where now? Another queue to a bank to collect the 200 Deutschmark welcome money from the West German government. That's £60 to add to the £10 they brought with them. To the Kurfürstendamm now, West Berlin's famous shopping street that Simone has seen on TV, read about in the papers, and dreamed of. And dream is all she can do. There's practically nothing in this women's shop for under £100. And amid the sophistication, the Krauleides feel out of place in their bomber jackets. Across the street, trainers from £50 up. Difficult for a man who earns around £35 a week. The Krauleides are both bakers. They have 2 children, one at school today. They live in a 2-room flat with no bath. Jointly, they earn around £300 a month. Half that goes on rent, electricity and food.
Können Sie dafür bezahlen? Nein.
With around £40 a week for clothes for the whole family, there can be no new trainers.
They have no car and no phone, 10-year waiting lists for both. They have a black and white TV and are saving up for a family holiday in Poland. Certainly jeans at £30 are out of the question. Fortunately, they're too full round the hips, and anyway, in East Germany, jeans are just £2. The Krauleidis have found a less expensive shop for a present for their 7-year-old son. But sweatshirts at £5.50 are still too much. Braces at £1.50 though, that's perfect. In fact, they'll buy him 2.
It's extraordinary. This is probably the busiest shopping day West Berlin has ever known. Just look at the crowds down there. The irony of it is, most of them are East Berliners, and they simply aren't buying anything.
For East Germans, West Berlin is a city to look at and dream.
Hätten Sie, das hat Sie erstaunt?
Were Roberto and Simone astounded, I asked them over dinner, that their country was breaking free? No, they replied, except for the sheer speed of it. Would they like to come and live in the West? No, the people aren't as friendly here as in the East, and how on earth would they find a job? They're happy for life in the West to remain a dream.
It's easy to forget that this has been a two-way process. Most of the traffic has been people coming from the east into the west, but West Berliners are now able to explore the east as well. Gavin Scott joined one family on just such a journey of discovery.
Helga and Inga Glubrecht, aged 12 and 9, have lived in Berlin nearly all their lives and never set foot in most of it. Their parents, Jürgen and Gudrun, are determined this state of ignorance will end. This weekend, they piled the family in the car and headed for the Berlin Wall. But though the tide of freedom may be running at the full, it hasn't yet swept away East German bureaucracy. 2 hours later, they still hadn't got through the checkpoint queues. 2.5 hours later, however, they were finally in East Berlin's famous Alexanderplatz. And Jürgen was telling the children not to expect too much of communist department stores, except size. A glance at the Christmas window confirmed this. Even the dwarf looked unconvincing. But the children were impressed by the glitzy-looking space-age TV tower and insisted on going up it. 365 meters in the air, the children were finally face to face with the whole of the city they live in. The river, the S-Bahn, the rows of regimented tower blocks. But they didn't properly understand what the war was about, even when their mother tried to combine a little political history with an English lesson.
You see, when you look out of the window, the wall. It's white from the side and it's not colored as we see it from the West Berlin side. Think about today, all the people from East Berlin can come to West Berlin. About 28 years, it was not allowed to come to West Berlin.
The significance of today for the Glubrecht family is not just the fact that they brought their children to see East Berlin for the first time, but also that they're able to show them the historic heart of the city the West has been cut off from for so long. Nor is it just the city's distant past the children can come to grips with in the East. These bullet holes in the church wall date from Hitler's last stand. But the family was in for a disappointment when they got to what they hoped would be the high point of their trip, the Brandenburg Gate. The soldiery was back and keeping the civilians well away from the gate itself.
The faces of the people are not smiling and they look very serious.
I wanted to see the laughing faces, which I have seen at television the last days. And I'm curious because it's not nice here at the moment.
I hope that the next year our children can go to Alexanderplatz or through the Brandenburg Gate every day and for every time they want.
The irony is, even if that comes to pass, will West Berlin's children ever realize what an achievement it is?
In part 2, we have 4 more reports from East Germany. Join us again after the break. In just a matter of days, Herr Egon Krenz, the obscure and rather secretive head of East German security, rose to become the country's leader, and he began the process which led to the end of the wall. Nick Gowing now profiles the man who's steering towards reform in a bid to avoid revolution.
As with most East German leaders, few people knew much about Egon Krenz before he came to power 3 weeks ago. And today, even after the extraordinary events of the past week, few seem sure what to make of him. As one party voice put it, is he a real reformer or just a political opportunist? Perhaps a transitional figure who'll soon be dumped, just like some of these ages his new political power seemed to falter. On Monday, as rumors swirled about where the political guillotine would fall, East German television coverage at a celebration of the Soviet Revolution showed Mr. Krenz briefly as only one face among many. On Tuesday, as protesters dared to take their anger to the very heart of the Communist Party machine, not only did the complete government resign unexpectedly, there was speculation that a political accident might soon befall Mr. Krenz. And at party headquarters the next day, it seemed that it had. The once faceless members of the Central Committee were told within a few minutes of their arrival that Mr. Krenz and the whole Politburo had resigned. But within an hour, Mr. Krenz had bounced back, and later he appeared live on television on the steps of party headquarters, his mood unusually spontaneous and combative for an East German politician.
We want a socialism which is economically effective, politically democratic, morally enduring, and that serves all the people. We must work together for the good of us all.
His predecessor, Erich Honecker, had never spoken so passionately in public. With the support of a new reformist Politburo, Mr. Krenz clearly feels self-confident enough to cultivate a new East German version of Gorbachev-style pavement politics. Not only is he fighting to court millions of skeptical East Germans, he's trying to win over Western politicians like Johannes Rau, a leading member of West Germany's Social Democratic Party, who called in on Thursday. For Mr. Krenz, the dramatic and unexpected decisions to tear down the Berlin Wall and announce free elections are the way to convince East and West that he is as good as his reformist word and does mean business. But Mr. Krenz has an unflattering reputation. He's renowned for his alleged heavy drinking, and few outside the party leadership trust him. He's also resented for being married to a Russian and for his privileged Communist Party lifestyle, which includes a 12-room villa with marble floors, a sauna and 3 bathrooms. A Communist Party rally on Friday night was designed to crown for Mr. Krenz a week of momentous decisions on the Berlin Wall and free elections. But the triumph seemed to be fading already. Reformist Party members complained of his return to old, grey, uninspiring language. Horseface is the disparaging nickname many use for Mr. Krenz. Some still believe he's not the right person to lead reform, but others are prepared to give him time. The planned meeting with West German Chancellor Kohl in December, which Mr. Krenz publicly welcomed on television last night, with conditions, is the next beacon he can cling to as the daily drama in East Germany unfolds.
There's always been an opposition in East Germany, but before now it hasn't been allowed to operate or come out into the open. New Forum changed all that, and as Caroline Kerr reports, their achievements have been quite spectacular.
A week ago, Michael Goebbels was branded as subversive. In any other country, this philosophy student from East Berlin would be an unknown academic. But as a leading member of the unofficial group New Forum, he was accused of undermining the East German state. The Gethsemane Church was until recently one of the few places New Forum could meet for political discussion without fear of arrest. In a country where all political meetings were banned, the church provided the only sanctuary. Michael Goebbels would admit New Forum were inexperienced, a motley crew of academics and artists with no coherent strategy, but they articulated the simple demands of ordinary people.
We want free election, we want freedom in some rights and something more, and the first or the most important thing for us is that we live in GDR, that we can work here, and that we can change the quality of the society.
By last Saturday, they'd become an unstoppable force. Almost 1 million people backed their demands on the streets of East Berlin in the biggest demonstration ever seen in the German Democratic Republic. By the middle of the week, the government was forced to acknowledge they could no longer ignore New Forum's demands. Michael Goebbels told a shambolic press conference they'd been allowed to organise legally and could no longer be suppressed.
We are now 3 months old, and now we have 200,000, and every day we get 1,000 more.
The cameras, please. Later the same day, he heard the news which astonished the whole country. East Berlin was opening its borders, including the Berlin Wall. Like everyone else, he set off for West Berlin.
A man come to me, hello, you are from GDR, I have a factory, and we think we give everybody 20 marks to buy some coffee or so. And he gave me 20 marks. I said, okay, I spent this for the New Forum. And we was happy together.
But for New Forum, the initial euphoria has now died down. By last night, they were back to business, trying to formulate a strategy for future opposition. They stress knocking down the wall hasn't solved their country's difficulties. Today, Gethsemane Church, which was once the scene of underground meetings, sees East Berliners rehearsing for a concert tonight to mark the week's historic events. But for New Forum, the real work is just beginning. And for Michael Goebbels, it could mean a political career unimaginable just 7 days ago.
The East German leader, Herr Krenz, is gambling that by opening the wall, he'll be able to allow his people to come over, but at the same time retain his skilled workforce. Content in the belief that they can come and go as they want, then they can go back home as well as make the visit to the West. That way he pleases his people and keeps the skilled workforce. As David Chater reports, the risk of a brain drain is serious. He's been looking at it through the eyes of a Leipzig doctor.
As the people of East Germany began their walk to freedom across the Berlin Wall, the people of Leipzig were gathering in their thousands in the streets of their city once again. Unaware of the news that had just broken, they were marching in memory of the Jewish victims of the Nazis and a night of terror known as Kristallnacht. Among the people who came to lay flowers and place candles at the Jewish memorial was a man who knows all too well the daily cost of East Germany's newly won freedoms. Dr. Herbert Stricktrod is an active member of the New Forum opposition and director of one of Leipzig's clinics for the old and the disabled. All the hospitals here are having to cope with chronic staff shortages as doctors and nurses join the exodus to the West. It's the patients who are suffering as wards are closed, operations cancelled. Many of these women are now on their own here. Their children and grandchildren have gone to the West. They can only watch the exodus from their hospital beds, knowing that they alone must stay here. This old lady could hardly speak for emotion when I asked her about the opening of the Berlin Wall. It's caused us such pain, she said. The director of the clinic says many hospitals are simply not coping.
The
people are the ones who suffer the consequences, either because they have to take over the jobs, because they feel a duty to take over, or simply because they can't be filled anymore. So the people are really suffering medically.
The staff that are left in the hospitals are having to take on 2 or 3 extra jobs, like cooking and cleaning, in an attempt to keep patient care going. It's a punishing routine.
I think we can accept certain things for the sake of freedom and reform, and that's a reason for me to stay.
The staff are working in hospitals which are hopelessly outdated. The heating system here consists of a boiler which has to be manned 24 hours a day and constantly fed with coal. It's a job nobody wants. This square in the center of Leipzig, Karl-Marx-Platz, is where the mass movement for reform first found its voice. None of them knew when it started how powerful that voice would prove to be. In the city's famous concert hall next to the square, it was heard again. The clinic's director joined hundreds of other workers in the health sector to air grievances and frustration with the officials who are running the service. Here, a handicapped teenager complains bitterly about the lack of facilities for the disabled in Leipzig. A nurse describes how in her hospital there's no hygienic method for disposal of used bandages. The applause is loud and the authorities at last seem to be listening.
Ulrich Makosch is a face East Germans recognise as the man who's brought them the news for 25 years. As well as presenting, he's the deputy editor of their main TV channel, one of the old guard. This week he's had to throw away the rules that have got him this far, and the people are watching more of what they want to know, and not just what others think they should know.
It means that we are completely free to say, to broadcast, to televise, whatever we want. That is the difference between today and between just 1 month ago. We don't fence out any news, any problems. We have the problems in a news, and we have the success and we have the failure in the news concerning the coverage, concerning the developments of the GVR.
By midweek they were covering the demonstrations. No more lies, asked the banners, and the East German reporter told the viewers he'd got it wrong a few days before.
An diesem 23. Oktober allerdings fühlten sich...
With no clear rules, they've been unsure what to do. Their cameras were the last at New Forum's news conference, yet the bulletin only mentioned it. Allowing the opposition to speak for themselves was still too risky. Communist Party leaders were known to detest their television tower because the sun reflected a cross on it. Their people simply detested their television service. Do they now believe they're being told the truth? Mostly yes, but we don't know what they leave out. And before they just lied. They used to make everything look better than it was. Now they're certainly telling us the truth. By Friday, programs were being interrupted with live coverage from Checkpoint Charlie, a special on-the-spot report on how to leave East Berlin.
We are not a TV of the government or of the parties or organizations which form the government, but we would like to be a television of the whole people. And also a television of those people who had no opportunity at all to express their view before in this TV.
Here at East German television, all journalists seem to share Herr Makosch's enthusiasm. It may be they're simply following the new party line, but they feel they're independent and no longer a mouthpiece of the government. Herr Makosch told me he was still proud to be a member of the Communist Party. Yet his job this week has changed as much as it has for the guards on the border.
As we continue to look at the events of the last few days through the eyes of the people who were here, in part 3 we talk to Herr Willy Brandt, the former mayor of West Berlin. In 1963, Herr Willy Brandt beamed when John F. Kennedy called for the wall to be torn down. He was the mayor of West Berlin then. Today he's a folk hero whose dream came true. David Rose profiles the man who led West Berlin and West Germany, and who 3 days ago shed a tear when the people scaled the wall for the first time.
Willy Brandt, the man who spoke for West Berlin when the wall was built, was in the German parliament when the news was announced. MPs of all parties in the Bundestag sang the national anthem. Brandt hugged his neighbour in sheer pleasure before leaving the chamber. The opening of the border was the culmination of his life's work. After celebrating the momentous news here at the Bundestag on Thursday night, Willy Brandt flew to Berlin. 28 years before, he'd been the mayor of West Berlin when the wall was built around his city, imprisoning it in East Germany. Along with practically every senior West German politician, Brandt was invited to West Berlin by the city's Senate. But to the Berliners, East and West, now mingling in one huge excited throng along the wall, he was the man above all others they wanted to see. It was a joyous moment for the crowd and for Brandt.
Looking at these hundreds of thousands of people moving from one part of the city to the other, from the other to the one, this was one of the happiest days of my life.
Then in the evening, Willy Brandt was one of the main speakers at the vast Freedom Rally at the Schönenberg City Hall. Half hidden by the battery of microphones, the 75-year-old Brandt said, close to tears, "I am happy to be able to see this day." In contrast to Brandt's rapturous reception, West Germany's current Chancellor, Helmut Kohl, was almost shouted down by left-wingers. The Chancellor had interrupted a highly sensitive visit to Poland, and in Bonn he held a special emergency cabinet meeting. Top of the agenda, how to pay the huge costs of resettling the refugees, and a German bilateral summit between Kohl and Egon Krenz. At a big press conference afterwards, Kohl was talking tough, accusing the opposition SPD of exploiting the situation, though the Chancellor specifically excluded Willy Brandt. And in the same hall 20 minutes earlier, Brandt told ITN of his feelings when the wall was built.
I remember the day when the wall was brought up, 13th of August, 61, as one of the saddest days in my life. And also then one had to address hundreds of thousands of fellow citizens, but one was only able to express, give expression to our deep dissatisfaction with the situation. And to be honest, we were also very unhappy then that obviously our friends, our protecting powers were not able to change anything as far as the other part of the city was concerned.
On Friday, Berliners both east and west acknowledged their debt to Willy Brandt for his firmness and courage when the wall went up, and his vision that it need not be a permanent barrier.
So Berlin is now an open city, and yet the two Germanys, East and West, remain individual sovereign states. So have we seen the beginning of a process that will lead inevitably to a reunited Germany? Or does the turmoil end here, where it began, at the wall? Jon Snow looks at the two Germanys, their bitter past and their uncertain future.
Asking the question, what happens now the wall is open, is something the strategists never posed, because none of the experts ever believed things would work out this way. But by tracing the stepping stones by which East and West reached this point, and by talking to the Germans themselves, it is possible to piece together something of what the future may look like.
East Germany is a country strewn with the paraphernalia of earlier European arrangements, each in its own way a building block towards today's developing drama. Like many other cities here, Dresden still wears the scars of the Second World War. But under Soviet occupation at war's end, East Germany had none of the West's martial aid with which the people could rebuild. The Soviets gave the East Germans institutions, structures, and a Stalinist philosophy from above, but little material help, so that whilst their industry became some of the best in the Eastern Bloc, it was never a match for West Germany's. In Schönwalde, a typical East German village about 100 miles from Berlin, we found the people quietly proud of the country they have built, but weighed down by the atrophied communist apparatus beneath which they have labored to maintain it. This man had been on demonstrations with New Forum. The old farmer resented the fact that every 3 months or so, several hundred Soviet tanks moved through his village to the Eastern Front, scuffing the curbstone and the cobbles as they go. But what we did not find in anyone we spoke to was any desire for a reunited Germany. This woman wanted the freedoms her generation had lost out on, and wanted the potential to be realized in her own country, as a country. Along the route back across East Germany into East Berlin, construction teams are at work on the kind of road infrastructure that West Germany completed in the 1960s. There is a widespread understanding in this country, because of the economic imbalances, that German reunification would anyway be on the West's terms, condemning those in the East to becoming the tools of a West German desire to expand their economic strength in Europe still further. In West Berlin, as East Germans queued at banks for the handouts of West German marks, again we found few who wanted a united Germany, and no one who wanted to stay. All wanted better relations across the border, relations that would eventually reduce the border to that between any two other nations in Europe. They said here that the several 100,000 who'd fled to the West before these days were not representative of the reform movement. So if the message from the Berlin Wall is that peace has broken out both sides of it, how do history's stepping stones guide us to the implications for wider superpower peace? It was only 3 years ago that Reykjavik's Hofti House played host to what has since proved one of history's most dramatic summits. For it was here that Mr. Gorbachev spelt out his dream of a nuclear-free world, and here that then President Reagan nearly accepted it. But the West ruled it out, not least because they said it was impossible without the tearing down of the Berlin Wall. Now suddenly the wall is many times breached. It was Mr. Gorbachev who refused to allow his troops to help defend it. The concern remains Mr. Gorbachev's own future and what must now be running through the minds of the Soviet forces he has confined to their barracks across Europe. Finally, the Gorbachev dream of a common European home, discounted in the West because no home divided by an iron curtain could be common. But November 1989 marked the moment the dream became the dawning of a reality.
John Snow, what is the abiding memory you'll take back with you, having covered this story?
It is the mile upon mile of East Germans that we saw last night queuing at Checkpoint Charlie and the other crossing points on the western side of the wall, waiting to go back to their homes in East Germany, and of a sense that the West may have severely misjudged what has happened here.
Trevor, what do you think is likely to happen next?
Well, so far, this whole revolution has been led by the people. The politicians have been left rather hopelessly in the wake, waiting to react to what has happened. But watch next what happens at that meeting between Helmut Kohl and Egon Krenz. Watch also what happens in the common market. And above all, watch the summit, because the entire summit between Gorbachev and Bush, the whole character of that meeting has now been altered beyond anybody's guess at all.
And John Suchet, the future, what's your prediction?
Well, I'd like to pick up on Trevor's point. This has been a people's revolution. This is people power. It's the politicians, of course, who have made this happen, but it's the people who made the politicians make it happen. The people have said to the politicians, this is our country, we will decide its future. Alison.
Thank you all, gentlemen. Well, it has been a quite extraordinary story, brimful with political significance and with raw emotion. It's one of those stories you only see once in a while, and yet it may be the beginning, as I think all of us were saying, of something with a much greater and deeper significance. What is not in doubt is that history has been made and unmade in Berlin over the last 4 days. From all of us in Berlin, a very good afternoon to you.
Do the walls come down when you think of me? Do you let me in? Do the walls come down? Oh baby, do the walls come down? Do the walls come? Do the walls come? Do the walls come down?
Less than a year ago, this stroll I'm taking in the autumn sunshine would have been impossible. The border was firm and tight. But now, on the eve of reunification, I'm able to walk completely unmolested from what was West Germany to what was East Germany and back again. Well, the political and economic ramifications of these dramatic changes, of course, are widespread. But tonight we'll be taking a look at how they affect just one section of the community, the British serviceman and his family, based here in Germany. For the German people, the new year brought changes that were spectacular, dramatic, and unbelievable. After 30 years, they were no longer divided by a wall of concrete and political ideology. The reunification of Germany, only a year earlier an impossible dream, was now a reality. But as the Berlin crowds revelled in a welter of euphoria, on the horizon loomed the spectre of big changes for the British forces, soon to be stationed in a sovereign, united Germany.
I think the indirect repercussions of unification will be that the West Germans will become much more inward-looking because of the problems that they are still facing with East Germany, social problems, economic problems, political problems. Therefore, the repercussions on the British community and on all foreigners in Germany, I think, will be indirect. Germans will turn away from anything, turn their interest away from anything that is foreign, and I think the foreign troops are included in this, just as the refugees and asylum seekers and the many refugees that might still come from Eastern Europe. Germany is going to be preoccupied with itself and its problems, and I think in that way the British community is going to be affected. This may not necessarily be felt individually, but generally I think the atmosphere will change.
Some changes came quickly. Already gone are the border patrols flown by the Army Air Corps in support of the Frontier Service. The last patrol was a formal affair, a formation flight by British and German helicopters. A joint venture by 664 Squadron and the Bundesgrenzschutz, with whom they've shared the job of guarding the 700 miles of wire fencing that separated East and West.
We are happy about that the border has disappeared. All the obstacles in the future will disappear, and that the population in the former German Democratic Republic are able to go where they want.
For the army flyers, it's the end of what they say is just another job.
Well, to be fair, we didn't do it every day anyway. We did border patrols, again, before November, about once a week. And it was always considered to be a bit of fun. Often we would have passengers along and we would be able to brief them on the border in conjunction with our colleagues from the British Frontier Service.
Now it's all gone, are you going to miss it?
Very much, I think, very much. For me, I've been doing it for 10 years, off and on, and yes, I will miss it, very much. We will continue to have our relationship with the Bundesgrenzschutz, but of course there will be no British Frontier Service. It's an end of an era.
It's the end of an era too for the Berliner, the British military train. It's being made redundant. The last trip from Berlin to Brunswick is planned for November. For 40 years, the train has played a major role in maintaining the British forces' right of access from the west to Berlin. The 8 luxury coaches, hauled ironically by an aging Russian locomotive, is no longer boarded and searched by forces of the Warsaw Pact. East Germans wanting to travel west no longer need to risk their necks smuggling themselves aboard. But even today, protocol remains. So too do the British armed guards in the corridor, and the doors remain chained and locked. But for the British television cameraman, East Germany is no longer forbidden landscape. The running of the last train will be a sad day for the man in charge, Warrant Officer Ken Laws. He'll miss the Russian military officials he's met up with every trip.
The first time you meet them, you're looking for the ogre, you're looking for the big bear, this person that you've been told is there and is your enemy. It very quickly transpires that they are merely human beings who are trying to do a job, albeit in a different army. However, because we belong to armies, both with our own discipline, you can very quickly come to terms with them. And I have found that Soviet personnel are very interesting, they're very witty, they've got a good sense of humour. And I personally have got on very well with them. And I'm going to miss that contact very much.
For the British serviceman and his family, the reunification of Germany is both the good news and perhaps the bad. On the bright side, of course, is the freedom of movement. And Rob Olver has been with a British family taking a shopping trip into what until very recently was forbidden territory. A September morning at Northampton Barracks, Wolfenbüttel. Sergeant Fred Tyler and his wife Connie are off to East Germany. This time last year, such a trip would have been inconceivable. But since March, even British soldiers have been free to travel there.
As soon as we found out about it from our neighbours and all the rest of it, we just sort of got in the car and came across more curiosity than anything else.
Today, the hour-long journey has brought Fred and Connie to the town of Halberstadt.
As a sort of a Westerner, you tend to think that the East is very cold and sort of you can't get in there, the wall basically. But now it's all open. You find that the people are exactly the same as the Western West Germans. The economy is coming along quite well now, and the shops, just look around you, and you can see more or less the same in the West. We were very happy for the East and West to join together, in fact. And on the other hand, there was this uncertainty of what we was going to do next. The rumour is strong at the moment about cutting regiments and the rest of it, and obviously everybody fears their job. For instance, I've just bought a brand new car, so the last thing I want is somebody to turn around and say, well, we don't need you anymore.
If the future looks uncertain for people like Fred, Connie believes many wives will welcome the prospect of returning home.
I think most of them are looking forward to going back to the UK, as you say, mainly for job opportunities and also to be home, really, because quite a few have been over here so long, and they're just looking forward to having the children settled and going back home.
I'm very pleased that at last East and West Germany are together and the peace is there. If it means to say that I have to go back to the United Kingdom and do my job over there and train to be a soldier, so be it. It doesn't worry me that much at all, and I think I speak for quite a few of the soldiers as well.
No one's quite sure when the last Berliner will run, but it'll certainly be within the next few weeks. What will then happen to this unique train isn't clear, but it's most likely that together with many other symbols of the Cold War and a divided Germany, it'll end up in a museum. With it will go at least memories of Checkpoint Alpha, straddling the British end of the 130-mile road corridor to Berlin. It's scheduled for early demolition. But for the military, one thing hasn't changed: the vital need for training and the room to do it. For many years, Zoltán Lüneburg has been a favoured scene for large-scale training operations. But the late 80s saw a growing clamour from German environmental groups for that training to be curtailed and even ended completely. Britain has reluctantly agreed to an end to flying its fighter aircraft at less than 1,000 feet. Reunification could lead to further demands.
I think the pressure is great on Chancellor Kohl, who will certainly, I think almost certainly, be re-elected in December, to transfer even more training to places like Canada and overseas. And I think it will be pressure that will come from politicians as well as from the people. And I think, yes, it's that way we're going. And I think the British have got a slightly worse reputation in the mind of the average German than the Americans and the French would have when it comes to military training and exercises. So I think, yes, the pressure will grow.
And that's a view partly shared by other leading German commentators.
I don't think that there is a difference between British troops or other foreign troops in Germany. So you can't say there's a special opposition against British troops. There is a general opposition of the population against troops, even German troops.
those Germans who are calling for the quick withdrawal of British forces from their new unified state are unlikely to get much support from the garrison areas. Towns like Osnabrück, home of 6,000 British troops and their families. More than 80% of the local economy depends on the British forces. If they go, so too will hundreds of German jobs. If the British soldiers and their families do go home, local economists say Osnabrück will become a ghost town.
The trade unions are creating a lot of pressure, and this is going to be a problem which has to be very carefully balanced again by the politicians, because of course local politicians do not want to see cities and villages having their economic existence being taken away by the withdrawal of British or other foreign troops. So this is also a problem. These are two ends of the same problem which any politician will in future have to deal with in a very delicate and balanced way.
The crumbling of the wall and the rapid move towards reunification has already led to some economic problems for British personnel. The West German government's move to subsidize landlords who accommodate those from the east is just one. It's led to an immediate shortage of housing available for British personnel, not in quarters. And where private housing is available, rents have increased dramatically. There's been an equally dramatic increase in the price of a major attraction for British troops: top quality second-hand German cars. The trade say they've been snapped up by those who've moved in from the east. All the economists agree. West Germany will pay a high price for reunification, growing unemployment, and even a drop in living standards. Cause, they claim, for growing resentment against British forces, seemingly protected against such problems.
There is great resentment against anything military, East and West Germany. The trend is there. People don't see the cause for a large military presence in Germany, and there are of course cuts which are being envisaged. But I've traveled a lot in East Germany, and people there, 11% according to one opinion poll of people want to be in NATO in East Germany. The rest say we want some sort of vague new European security system. Now I can only imagine that the popular and political pressure for a reduction of military presence, including the Bundeswehr, is going to increase over the years, and plus the fact that Germany will look more and more to the Soviet Union and to the East for economic reasons, investment and so on.
That's a controversial view rejected by some political observers who believe the close relationship developed over the past 40 years between the British troops and their German neighbours will remain.
I do expect that harmony will maintain because of the reduction of the troops, I foresee. And I think the intelligence of my countrymen is that big to see the importance of the presence of foreign troops in Germany. Presence of foreign troops in Germany mean security in Germany and in Europe.
And maintaining security is still of paramount importance to the senior British commanders in Germany. But they accept that reunification will mean changes, both in the long term and the short, for the British serviceman and his family.
Obviously there will be some things which are clear to everybody. If a British military train is not going to travel daily to Berlin like it does at the moment. We're not going to man checkpoints on the corridor up to Berlin. And the border patrols, which we've had for so many years now, will cease. In actual fact, the border patrol, which we mount from the Corps, has already ceased. So I don't think there will be tremendous changes which will be noticeable to start with. As far as long term is concerned, I think I would say one thing first, and that is there is a danger of mixing up the effects of unification and also the effects which are going to be caused by options for change. Now, I'm quite clear that the Federal Republic of Germany want British forces and Allied forces to stay in the new Germany. That's been said by our own Secretary of State and by Chancellor Kohl. So I think that's quite clear. However, the alliance will change. Our Secretary of State, Tom King, said as much in his statement in July, and which he made after the NATO summit, which also came out with a similar statement saying that we needed to change and adapt the alliance for the new circumstances.
The effects of reunification, big and small, are just one unpredictable future facing British forces here in Germany. Still to come is the government's options for change and possible major cuts in defence spending, the so-called peace bonus. Just what lies ahead for the British troops and their families isn't clear, but the media experts all agree. In 5 years' time, there'll be far fewer of them living and working in Germany.
As we all know, some cuts have already been agreed, but I think there will be a rump. There will be a token force here, just as there will be of the French and the American forces. I don't see them disappearing completely because West Germany is committed to NATO and to greater European Union, and I think only to underline that it will want to have some sort of presence.
On the eve of reunification, the future of the combined Germany is still very much unpredictable. But what is sure is that the lives of every single British serviceman and their family here in Germany will never quite be the same again.